Okay, Ikshika. Good afternoon, Aradhita. Ikshika, good afternoon.
Lucky
Anushri,
sir.
good afternoon. Very good, very good. Okay. Manaswini, can you just tell all the students to join? All right. I think people are joining. Good, very good afternoon. So today's class, we will look at two different things before we move into the final module. Okay, let me remind that this course has assignments, and I think your assignments were due a long time ago. Nobody has given out any assignment so far. But I need to mark your assignments anyway, right? Whether if I get it, I will mark. If I don't get it, I will not be able to mark it. Okay. So that being said, I would like all of you to turn in your assignments by 22nd.
Assignment
Whoever has, if you can submit before that, that's fine. But the last date for your assignment submission is 22nd. As I said, you can take any one of the topics. You can have your own thoughts, develop it, or you can take an ethical questionnaire. That is something that will, also be an interesting thing. Take an ethical questionnaire. Check with the, school going kid, maybe check with the college kid, maybe check with your grandparents. You can see how ethics can be different, for different. Some of them are going to be same, some of them can be, have a range. So it will be an interesting thing to do. Last year the students did an ethical survey, across spectrum, so you could do a similar thing. Whatever it is, assignments have to be submitted by 22nd of this month. Okay. Okay. Let's quickly look at the
excuse me, sir.
yeah.
Sir, if you're making a presentation, like whatever assignment is, where do we have to submit it?
You have to submit it to me, mail it to me.
Oh, okay, sir. Okay.
Okay, okay, okay. All right. So here it is. So we are in a very volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous environment, right? Things have cleared up a lot, but I think all said and done, you still have a lot of ambiguity. People are they're predicting that the third wave will hit in August, and it became September, and now they think that with the approaching season, when people will gather in large amount, large crowd, it is a possibility that third wave may hit, or maybe some of them think that the third wave may become an endemic one, not a epidemic or not a pandemic. Okay, it is a possibility. So we're still in an uncertain environment, right? Now, we all know that businesses took a lot of hit. Economies took a lot of hit during this COVID pandemic, right? Few countries manage their economy really well, right? So each business has its own ethics and has its own responsibility, right? So we look at two things. One is on business ethics and social responsibility, and how sometimes unethical behaviors, fortunately or unfortunately, unethical behaviors cannot go on and on and on. At some point of time, it just catches up with them, and it gets exposed. And it doesn't matter. This has happened to businesses in India, it has happened to businesses in the United States, it has happened to businesses everywhere. Anytime you end up doing something unethical, at some point of time, or the other, it will catch up and it will be exposed. Okay. And I keep telling that research has now become a massive exercise, right? In fact, countries are measured in terms of their research output. Okay, and so there is a lot of rat race among countries in terms of publishing quality one, and publishing in high impact journals, and in terms of its utility, right? So definitely, United States rank among the front line leaders, right? Maybe a decade ago, if you look at it, China was like far behind. But today, China is number two, and it is probably number one, or it is inching closer to number one in several areas. Okay, which means it is going to leave many countries far behind, and typically the disparity between these different countries can be very easily reflected in the scientific publication. For example, we barely see any good scientific publication emerging out of something like Africa or some of these other nations, right? For example, let's say from Nepal or Bangladesh or Bhutan or any of these countries, right? On the other hand, we know that every week after week, you will see some extremely powerful and impact articles coming in Cell, Science, Nature from United States, from European countries, once in a while from India, right? And from other countries, Japan, right? But there are these things, have a huge impact in terms of the policy, science education policy, in terms of research initiatives, in terms of public funding for research and all that. Okay. So we will look at those things subsequently. But unfortunately, in all these things, when there is a rat race, there will always be people who will cut corners, and they will end up in the wrong place at the wrong time, and they get caught. Okay, when caught, nobody can impose things all of a sudden arbitrary punishment. There are principles of natural justice. So we'll look at what principles of natural justice would entail, how you can do justice to any situation. Okay, so we'll look at business ethics and social responsibility. This is a 23-minute YouTube, and then we have a short this thing on principles of natural justice. Okay, now let me share. Now, all these things, I'm sure you must be thinking, no, I'm a MMB student, I'm a virology student, I'm an immunology student, I'm a BSc student. No, the idea is to expose you to real world things, right? We may be super duper happy in our own sphere, but the real world is not like that, unfortunately, right? So the idea is to expose you to the real world and the complexities of the real world. Okay, it's not that you people are being this thing. I just think that this gives you a legs up. You may be aware. I'm not denying that, but this is like a reality check. At least for those people, at least for some people who may think that they should be having it easy in the world. Okay, so I've shared my screen.
He did with his Ponzi scheme. So this issue of ethics.
Let me roll it back. Okay. So is the thing audible? The last time, I think last
Yes,
time.
sir, it was.
Okay.
Hi, this is Matt Alaniz, business instructor over at the Willow International Center. Thank you for being with me today. We're going to be discussing business ethics as well as social responsibility here today. Now, as you know, business ethics plays a significant role in terms of what goes on in business. We've seen a lot of news as of late with regards to companies and managers of those particular companies that have behaved in a less than ethical manner. We've all seen what happened with Enron and Tyco, and just recently some of the financial issues surrounding Bernie Madoff and some of the things that he did with his Ponzi scheme. So this issue of ethics is very prevalent, and we've seen almost more of a resurgence towards the idea of ethics, just because we've seen some people falter in this particular area. So over the course of this lecture, we're going to introduce you to the concept of ethics. Although everyone has a particular code of ethics, a lot of times it's difficult to articulate. A lot of times it's difficult to assess particular problems. And although our ethical framework is something that's instilled in us as we grow up, we do have some potential to control the outcome, so to speak. So hopefully we can give you some tools to analyze some of the situations that you're going to encounter so that you can determine whether or not you may be in a situation that could have some ethical implications and impact others. So with that said, let's go ahead and continue here. The first thing that we want to do is obviously get a good definition for what is ethics. And ethics really are simply beliefs about what's right and wrong. It could be beliefs about what is good and bad. Depending on what these beliefs are, they will lead you to believe that certain circumstances or certain situations may be obviously good or could be bad, depending on your upbringing. Ethical behavior, obviously then, would be beliefs that are right and wrong, but obviously conforming to your individual beliefs. So if you think that something is okay, then that would classify as ethical behavior. And one thing I will mention is that it's based upon your individual beliefs, meaning that everyone has room for disagreement, right? Some people consider some actions to be completely ethical and okay, while others do have a problem with that same particular action. So one thing to be aware of is that someone's definition or someone's view of what is considered to be ethical can vary from person to person. Conversely, unethical behavior is obviously behavior that does not conform to your belief about what is okay, what is good, what is right, or what is wrong, essentially. So if you have a view that companies that operate in the U.S. should not pay less than the prevailing wage or a living wage, so to speak, in some of these other third world countries, then you may view that as unethical. Some people may view that as ethical behavior. And there is a lot of disagreement associated with if that's okay. You know, there's a lot of press, as you see, about working conditions, particularly working conditions in American companies in plants that are overseas. And do American U.S. companies are they held to a higher standard? Given that they operate in the U.S., they're obviously familiar with U.S. laws, but then they open plants overseas, and the working conditions are much more poor. The hours that the people that work in these plants that are forced to work or that work in are much lengthier. They don't get regular rest periods. The pay obviously is much lower. They have potentially hazardous working conditions. So although that may be considered legal in that particular area, is it ethical? Because obviously they operate differently here in the U.S. You know, you may feel that it's okay, it may be not. It just really depends, and that's where your own individual beliefs come into play. And next we have business ethics. Now business ethics are of course your ethical behavior, but in the context of an actual business. So as we'll see, your opinion about what is right and wrong has a significant effect on the behavior of an actual company. I don't know why it's not letting me show this particular slide here. But anyways, with regards to business ethics, obviously it's our ethical and unethical behavior in a sense in the workplace. So the same ethical framework that we have individually is typically what we actually take to work with us, which is a lot of times the interesting thing is companies do a lot of training and a lot of teaching about what is good ethics, but for the most part, it really is instilled early on. We typically have some type of framework with regards to ethics as we grow up and as we mature based upon life circumstances and events that we've come across and things that we've seen. But businesses do, obviously, it's not an excuse for them not to emphasize ethics, of course, but to some extent, you can't really instill in someone a strong ethical framework. You can show them what is ethical versus unethical behavior, but a lot of this is instilled.
More than 20 million people use Grammarly every day to improve their writing. You can use it on your computer or your phone. And for your most important, Grammarly's editor provides comprehensive writing feedback on correctness, clarity, engagement, and delivery, so you and your ideas can make an impact. Elevate your cover letter from good to great with compelling word choice and concise phrasing to catch the hiring manager's attention. Then step into your role with confidence, knowing you can customize your goals to ensure your writing adapts to connect to any audience. Let your ideas speak for themselves with clear, mistake-free writing. Download Grammarly today for more professional writing.
Build in us early on. All right, real quick, just kind of a quick ethics exercise that I like to do here, and just obviously you're not able to respond or anything, although you may, which may sound a little weird if you're talking to yourself. But one of the things that we all know is that stealing obviously is wrong. We don't consider stealing to be okay. We have laws obviously against theft. And typically you see that when there is a general consensus about something being wrong, you typically will see some type of law about it. So obviously the general consensus in society is that stealing is bad. It's negative. It's not okay, and it's frowned upon. And there are laws obviously against stealing, theft, those types of things. But does your impact or your impression about if stealing is okay depend if someone is stealing for a basic human need? It may or may not. And that's where the gray area comes in. You know, obviously, if you want to draw a hard line and say it's black and white, stealing under any circumstances is not okay. But if you were in the situation to where you potentially had to provide for your particular family and had no other means of doing so, would you resort to stealing? I take a poll in my class about this, and predominantly, when I first ask the question if stealing is okay, everyone says no, stealing is bad. But then when I ask, okay, if you're stealing for a basic human need, if you were in a situation to where it was kind of providing for your family or not, and you had to resort to stealing, would you? And a lion's share of the class says yes, about 60 to 70% typically every time. And that's because our perception, if it's okay, changes depending upon the facts that we have at hand. A lot of times, or not a lot of times, but in 2005 when Hurricane Katrina hit kind of the Gulf Coast area, there was a lot of theft that went on in that particular area because people were stealing for basic human needs. They were stealing for water, food, clothing, those types of things. And they were stealing from stores that were otherwise, you know, kind of there was no way to get to those particular stores. So the goods in there were going to go bad, essentially. So does your perception of stealing is wrong change in that situation? It may not. I'm not trying to convince you that it's okay. I'm merely trying to help you think that, or help you think through the process that depending on what information you have, your perception of this can change essentially. The next thing is with regards to employee wages. Most people feel that, you know, obviously there is a standard in most states and there is a standard federally that you can't pay below, one, the federal minimum wage, but most states, some, go beyond that and pay a higher wage. But obviously you can't go below what is considered to be the federal wage, so to speak. But does your perception, if that's okay, if that's ethical, just because a company is paying the minimum wage that's required, does it change if they're paying less than what's called a living wage? A living wage is what's required based upon surveys and statistics and things to actually live in that particular area. Now, obviously, what it takes to live in an area such as San Francisco is drastically different than it takes for a place to live in the South, just because cost of living is very different. So does that change? Do companies like Walmart and different fast food companies, does your perception of their fairness or their engaging in ethical practices, does it change if they're paying less than a prevailing wage? Some people think yes, it does. Some people think no, it really doesn't, because in actuality, if those people wanted to make more money, they could get a second job. There's no reason they have to accept that job in the first place if it pays lower than what they need. So that is definitely an argument, obviously. But at the same time, is it something that's okay? Maybe, maybe not, depending on your opinion. All right, individual ethics here. Now, obviously, people develop a personal code of ethics. This is something that varies between individuals. It varies based upon culture. It varies based upon situations that you've been in through the course of your life. Certain situations may make you more predisposed to seeing behavior as ethical when others may disagree. If you grew up in an environment in your childhood that your parents engaged in unethical behavior, whether it was maybe forging a couple numbers on the tax return or stealing in the grocery store or lying or doing other sorts of things that maybe most people consider to be unethical, you may believe that that is okay because you grew up around it, right? That was considered to be normal. So why wouldn't you think that's okay, obviously? The next thing is influence from our peers. Now, obviously, we all have peer groups, people that we interact with regularly and that we consider to be friends, colleagues, or whomever. And depending upon the group's kind of mentality on what is considered okay in certain situations, people tend to adopt that same way of thinking, right? You would tend to socialize with people that think like you. And also, obviously, we have a need to be liked, wanted, accepted. And we may adopts a certain frame of reference, a certain frame or code of ethics that is consistent with what our peers believe as well, and that may be okay, that may be not. You ever wonder that, when you're in a group with your friends, your behavior sometimes changes. You take on maybe a different persona, so to speak, when you're around certain people, and that's because the influence of peers is very prevalent and it's very significant. Experiences in adulthood, obviously, this can have a dramatic impact on what your personal code of ethics can be. If you survived an event such as Hurricane Katrina, you may have a different view on what is considered to be acceptable behavior. Now, obviously, if you're presented with a life or death situation, your mentality changes at that point. You kind of switch into survival mode. So that can have an effect on your personal code of ethics as well. And lastly, your individual morals and values. Those are extremely important as well, depending upon your upbringing. Certain people have maybe religious backgrounds that obviously kind of has its own sort of code of ethics, so to speak, and what is acceptable and what is not. So depending upon that, you also will be more inclined to develop a certain code of ethics as well. All right, now managerial ethics. Managerial ethics is essentially beliefs about, once again, what is right or wrong, but for managers. And it guides managers over the course of their workday. Depending upon what a manager's own personal code of ethics are, it will affect how they react on the job to employees, suppliers, supervisors, to all these different types of things. With regards to employees, obviously a manager's code of ethics will affect their behavior towards employees. What are their hiring and firing practices? Is it okay to discriminate? Do they find it acceptable to? If they find, or if a manager is somehow given information that leads him to believe that a particular employee is in a hard financial situation and will essentially take the first offer, if they're inclined to lowball that offer, so to speak, is that ethical? Maybe, maybe not, right? Obviously, discrimination in hiring practices, discrimination in promotion practices. If you're promoting not based upon merit, based upon performance, but based upon someone that maybe is a friend of yours or someone that you're trying to groom for another position, is that considered to be ethical? Maybe, maybe not. Okay. Same thing with working conditions. Obviously, employees have, there are certain laws that regulate, obviously, the condition that employees work in. OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, does have laws, and they do conduct periodic audits of different businesses to make sure that they are in line with that. But obviously, there's a bare minimum, right? Is there a standard that employees should hold themselves to that maybe is higher than that particular minimum? Managers' ethics also affect how they react or their behavior towards the organization. There are a lot of things that come into play here, mainly conflicts of interest, right? A conflict of interest being an activity that benefits one person at the detriment of someone else. It could be colleagues, it could be employers, obviously taking bribes, doing all these different things, making concessions. If you're receiving something in return, those are things that can potentially harm an organization. And maybe depending upon your upbringing, you may think that that's okay. And in some areas of the world, bribes are considered to be a standard practice, so to speak. It's in some cultures it's considered to be okay. I remember my mom telling me a story about when she was pulled over, and this was years and years ago, multiple decades. And I was in the car with her, and I don't remember this at all. But she was saying that she got pulled over, and her mom, and who my grandmother, who has since passed away several years ago, is a native from Mexico, Spanish speaker all her life, didn't really speak English for the most part. And in that area of the world, it's considered, at least for her upbringing, it was considered to be okay to, it was considered to be actually standard practice to provide some type of financial compensation to police officers in a way of, kind of getting off with that particular ticket, because that was very prevalent, at least when she was in Mexico during that point in time. And so my mom remembers when she got pulled over, her mother, my grandmother, reaching in her purse and pulling out a wad of $20 bills to go ahead and hand to the police officer. And my mom tries to nonchalantly kind of shoo it away and say, no, don't do that. But that just kind of illustrates there's a difference in terms of what's okay, right? Depending on where you are in the U.S., or not necessarily the U.S., but in the world, you may have different perception on what is considered to be okay. To my grandmother, that was considered to be standard practice. That was something that you did. Life experience taught her that if you provide police officers money, then that will make the situation okay. Now, obviously, as we know, that doesn't really work, and that's usually frowned upon. So don't do that. I don't want you trying to bribe a police officer, then all of a sudden saying, well, my instructor said it was okay, and I don't see why not. I don't want to get that call, so please don't do that. Once again, though, depending on where you are, depending on your culture, how you grew up, obviously certain things are okay, certain things are not okay. And then also we have to handle our behavior with regards to other economic agents, includes customers, competitors, stockholders, suppliers, dealers, even unions. Depending upon a manager's personal code of ethics, they'll behave certain ways towards these individuals, and we'll discuss these a little more later on in the lecture as well. So if you're presented with a situation and you're not quite sure how to assess it, something doesn't sit right with you, how do you assess it for its ethical value, so to speak? How do you determine whether or not something is okay, a particular situation? Hopefully we can give you a little bit of information here to help you assess whether or not you feel a particular situation, or whether or not a situation is maybe at one end of the ethical spectrum, so to speak. So the first thing that you need to do is gather the relevant facts. This is very important. Any information is going to be important to help you judge whether or not a situation is ethical. Notice that most likely when we went over the exercise about stealing, that initially your perception of stealing may have been very much line in the sand. Stealing is wrong, stealing is unethical. But as I begin to give you more information, your perception may have changed a little bit. The life or death situation could have definitely changed your perception if stealing was ethical or not. So it's important to gather all of the relevant facts before making or jumping to a quick conclusion, so to speak. The next thing is analyzing those particular facts. This is very, very important. Once you've gathered all the relevant information, not make a decision, but kind of weigh the merit of each particular item there. You have to analyze them. It's important that you take your own personal code of ethics and then assess them against what the facts are. One will not necessarily have the same merit as the other, so to speak. And then lastly, you want to make an ethical judgment. Ethical judgment is extremely important. You have to make the decision and ultimately follow through with it, whatever it may be. Now, with regards to gathering relevant information, there's a series of questions that you can essentially ask yourself that will help you determine whether or not a situation is ethical, or at least help you point you in the direction of getting to a better conclusion if that is ethical or not. The first is with regards to what's called utility. Utility asks the basic question, does it benefit everyone equally? If a particular situation benefits one person at the expense of others, then it wouldn't be considered to be ethical, so to speak. I'll give you a great example. There was a news article in the Fresno Bee within several weeks ago, I can imagine, that was talking about the high-speed rail. And I forget the gentleman's name, but the head of the High-Speed Rail Authority, I think is the agency it's called, actually purchased property within a certain distance from where the Fresno high-speed rail station would be located downtown. So most of you might think, well, that doesn't seem like it would be a big deal for me. But the potential implications, you understand that once the high-speed rail goes into, the idea is that it's going to increase values in that particular area, or at least kind of the thought, I guess. It may not come to fruition, but the mentality is that that's going to bring a lot more economic development in the area, which of course is going to have people, commuting from different parts of the state, and they could potentially be here in the Fresno area, and obviously they would get off at that particular station, so you would have a need for maybe hotels to go around that area, restaurants obviously to go around that area, which would cause the property values to increase. So does that benefit everyone equally? Well, you might say that it doesn't, right? Because this particular person, who obviously had some maybe inside information, so to speak, went ahead and purchased property in those particular areas. You may think that, you know what, it seems to be okay. I don't have a problem with that. Now, legally, there is no problem with it because according to the High-Speed Rail Authority, they only allow you to purchase property within half-a-mile radius. So the mentality, or at least the thought, is that if it's without of that half-a-mile radius, then it shouldn't really affect property value, so to speak. So maybe that changes your opinion on it, maybe it doesn't. But once again, that situation doesn't benefit everyone equally, right? It's benefiting one particular person, and on top of that, this one individual obviously had information that wasn't considered to be public knowledge. So maybe that changes your perception of if that's considered to be ethical. The next thing is rights. Does the act respect the rights of everyone involved? Is it fair to everyone? Is it fair to have working conditions that aren't consistent in your company? Apple has come under a lot of pressure to release the names of its suppliers, specifically so that those particular areas can be monitored, so to speak. And they just recently came out with a document that included a majority of the suppliers for the components that go into their various products. That's not necessarily important. What's important is that the suppliers' locations are also known, so that all these consumer advocate groups who are trying to hold U.S. companies to higher standards when they actually offshore manufacturing overseas. Is this considered to be okay? And so obviously the working conditions have been obviously not up to par with where they are in the U.S. And you can argue that doesn't respect certain people's rights, so to speak, because it's not necessarily respecting their right to work in an not necessarily a hostile type environment, in a safe working condition. So that could be something that comes into play. Next is justice. Is it fair? Is a particular situation that you're encountering, is it going to be fair? Does it treat people with fairness? So this is extremely important. I mentioned my prior example with regards to wages and maybe having some type of inside knowledge about somebody's financial condition, and then using that against them to maybe lowball a particular offer or not offer them a particular raise because you know that they can't lose their job, or they know they're not going to quit because they need the job, they need that paycheck. Is that fair? Maybe not. One thing I will mention about these is a lot of situations you'll find will be a yes or a no to many of these things. So obviously something that does not benefit everyone equally may not be fair. So just know that you can have multiple of the same answers to all of these different things here as well.
All right. So just to sum it up, ethics is pretty much a personal one. A lot of us may share, common ethics. So all of us may look at it from the same perspective, but within that, also you may have variability. Okay. So that was on business ethics and social responsibility. Let's look at the principles of natural justice. Anybody wants to add anything, say anything?
Hello everyone. So in today's video, I'm going to talk about principles of natural justice. Now we'll discuss its origin, how it's enshrined in our constitution, and some of its limitations very broadly. This topic is more important for mains, the origin of so the term principles of natural justice has been derived from the expression jus natural, which means natural rights. These rights are based on the system that something is either fundamentally wrong or fundamentally right. For example, stealing is fundamentally wrong. Nowhere in the world someone will say that stealing is good. Similarly, helping someone in need is good. No one is going to say don't help others. Okay. Now, these principles are also known as common sense justice. Now, common sense is practical knowledge, right? For example, if you're hungry, you eat food. That's a common knowledge. For example, you do not cut the branch of the tree on which you're sitting on, as Kalidas has been accused of doing, because that's against common knowledge. You'll fall down. Now, of course, when it comes to judiciary, it's not going to be as simple because lawyers make things complex. So we'll see how principles of natural justice relate to common sense justice. And finally, these principles, they may not be part of a law. That is, a law may not explicitly say that the principles of natural justice have been incorporated in them. However, they are necessary to be followed to ensure justice. That is, these principles are essential for delivery of justice. Now, how these are essential, we are going to discuss that part in this video. Even the Supreme Court of India has eventually incorporated these provisions in many articles of the Constitution by virtue of this argument only that these principles are necessary to ensure justice. Coming to the components of the principle of natural justice. So there are three components. The first two were derived from the Roman times, while the third one is a modern addition. The first principle says, audi alterum partem, which means hear the other party. Now, of course, say you've been accused of a crime. If you're not given the opportunity to present your case, how will you ever defend yourself? What if you have been falsely accused of that crime? Justice won't be done towards you. Thus, it is necessary that you are given the opportunity to be heard for the delivery of justice. Okay, so the first principle ensures that justice is done. Similarly, the second principle, nemo judex in causa sua, it means rule against bias. In other terms, it means that no person should be the judge of their own case. Or in a broader term, a person who has some interest in that decision should not be a part of that panel who decides what is to be done. Okay, like recently you must have read that the CJI of when the sexual harassment charge was framed against the Chief Justice of India, Justice Nariman recused himself from that panel because he said he's close to the Chief Justice and it might lead to bias. Okay. Similarly, if say I have stolen something or I've done a crime and I'm the one who's adjudicating that case, I'm not going giving a decision against myself. My self-preservation instincts will kick in. Similarly, like say you're entering a competition, you're one of the participant and you're one of the judges, you are going to give some benefit to yourself. It's only human to do that. So the principle says to ensure justice, one shouldn't be the judge in their own case, or one shouldn't be personally, emotionally attached to the case. Now, the third, the modern one is reasoned decision, which means reason must be given out, a detailed reason must be given out for any decision that has been taken. And that is why you see Supreme Court has some huge judgments. Like the Aadhaar case judgment was 1500 plus pages. The recent reservation case judgment was again 900 pages. The reason for this is they are writing every argument and counter argument and opinion put forward by the petitioner, by the counselor, and even by the judges who are hearing the case. This ensures that a process has been laid out, chain of thought for coming to the decision is out there for everyone to see, to accept that yes, justice has been done. So that's how these three principles are the component of the principles of natural justice. They help ensure that justice has been done. Coming to how natural justice is enshrined in our constitution. Oh, they have not been mentioned explicitly anywhere in the constitution. Nowhere there's an article talking about the principles of natural justice are part of the Indian constitution, part of our judiciary or anything. However, the Supreme Court, through various judgments, have found that these principles are indeed incorporated in our constitution under various articles. Okay. Now we'll discuss these how these principles are incorporated in our constitution in detail, but like just for an overview, Article 14, which talks about right to equality, right against arbitrary action of state. Article 21 talks about life and liberty, that it cannot be taken away without a procedure established by law. Article 22 deals with that a person must be informed of the ground of arrest. They must be produced to a judicial magistrate, except in some cases related to preventive detention. Article 32 and 226 deals with enforcement of rights. So 32 deals with enforcement of fundamental rights specifically. 226 deals with enforcement of all the rights. So these four of them are more related to the fundamental rights section, that is part 3 of the Constitution. Article 39A has provision for free legal aid. This is a TPSP. And Article 311 deals with all India services, grants certain protection to the civil servants. So coming to the evolution of these principles in our constitution. First of all, we'll talk about Article 14 and the Supreme Court in various decisions, cases such as AK Kripak, Menka Gandhi, DTC versus DTC Congress, held that right to be heard is guaranteed under Article 14. It went on to say it is in essence, it enforces equality. Now, how does it enforce equality? Say state has taken an action against you, be it administrative, be it quasi-judicial, or be it judicial. Now, if the action has been taken against you and you're not given an opportunity to defend yourself, to present your own case, it amounts to inequality as only one party, which is, formulating the charges against you, is the party that is being heard. Okay. So you and that party are not on the similar footing. You both are at a separate footing. One has been given the chance to present its case when you are not given a chance to defend your case. And thus it violates the principle of equality. Not only that, it might also lead to some arbitrary action on the part of state because you are not given the chance to present your case. No one knows what happened exactly. Only one side of the argument is being given, the other side has been completely left out. That goes against Article 14, and thus the court held that right to be heard is guaranteed under Article 14. Now, in the Menka Gandhi case, the Supreme Court went on to say that yes, the principle of natural justice are are contained in Article 14 by the virtue of right to be heard. Now, in Menka Gandhi case, the court also said that in Article 21, the term law does not only mean procedure established by law. It does not only guarantee protection against arbitrary action of state. It suggested that the term law means due process of law. That means that the law should be fair, it should be reasonable, it shouldn't be arbitrary. Like legislature can't make an arbitrary law. Thus, maintaining that our constitution has the concept of procedural due process. And procedural due process or due process of law is a fundamental principle of natural justice as it ensures that the action by any organ of state is not arbitrary. This is how principle of natural justice is contained in Article 21 of our Constitution. So apart from Article 14 and 21, Article 22 has direct implications of principle of natural justice as it talks about that a person must be informed of their ground of arrest. Not only that, the said person must also be produced to a judicial magistrate within 24 hours, thus giving them an opportunity to be heard. So the first part, that the person is informed of their ground of arrest, is and especially in a country where the literacy rate is still not even close to 100%, people must be given free legal aid to ensure that they have the
Okay, so
opportunity
those
to
of you
present
who
their
want to
case
go out
and
for
ensure that
NTCC, go
justice is
ahead.
being done
Okay.
to them. Thus,
Um,
Article 39A also ensures that opportunity to be heard is given to everyone, irrespective of their economic standard. Now, Article 3.
okay, why don't we do this in the next class? We'll continue with that in our next class. All right. Um, all right. My mentees, we will meet at 4 o'clock. Okay. Akash and Anuradha and Diksha, right? You can WhatsApp me if there are any changes. All right. But 4 o'clock we'll meet. So we'll meet in our next class and continue on this discussion. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.